Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Thursday, October 26th. It is about 20 minutes before market open. I'm going to do this video as quickly as possible. So, yesterday it was a flip-flop day for me. I think that coming down beneath 934 on AMC was not in our benefit on the whole. You would like to see it hold the higher creek cross, especially because it made a higher high and it pushed resistance. When doing a comparison with this range to the previous range, that is like a bad sign. So it would indicate that this is probably some kind of an upthrust, and then you're going to have, it would be an upthrust, right? And then you would have like a sell-off, and presumably just a series of LSPYs until you get to the end. And then you'd either have a push-up for what we would call a UTAD, which is an upthrust after distribution, or you wouldn't get that at all. You could have any kind of a mild hook here. That's fine. We kind of got one yesterday, but then you'd end up with a sell-off that then breaks down and then heads low. In terms of like where it would go, the only thing I could say is that we do have a creek down here near the 850s, and I think it could be that shallow S-curve where we still get that drop down, but it doesn't necessarily go as far as maybe expected, and then you would perhaps chop down here. Either way, that kind of delays everything. It would be a very mixed bag of kind of uncertainty because you'd be waiting to see if there's a UTAD, because that's possible, in a distribution. It happens. Or you'd be waiting to see how long this comes down. It wouldn't be like a spring, like a normal spring. If it was a true distribution, it would come down and you can come pretty low. I mean, I found some other targets on this S-curve that are way down here. And I think someone else in the Discord group that we have mentioned like 775. And I was like, where did that come from? I actually found that target. So, there's definitely possibility of coming really low. The liquid shelf is way down here at 830. And then there's this huge liquid gap between, 850 and 9. So, when we look at the big picture here, where would it go kind of questions, it could go pretty low. I think if it goes down to 775, you're talking about you're already in the previous range area. So at that point, you're likely going to go back below it. I can't imagine why you would just sit back in the same range again. I think what's more likely, though, is if we were to come down low, it would be somewhere around the 850s, this little pocket, and perhaps reaccumulate and then push back up. And that could be good for us, in the long run. But I kept kind of banging my head about this because I was thinking about this structure. And there's a lot going on here in this structure that looks very familiar to me. But I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I think yesterday during the stream, I actually went to this area because there's this concept here of like this really high auto reaction and then this like really low like M cross down here. And then I was kind of waiting to see like, well, where's like the remaining part of this, and I couldn't quite put my finger on this bit. I was thinking about how I'd seen like these really sharp M crosses before, but this one looked really symmetrical to me. And then it had this really distinct down thrust, area in the middle. And I guess it took me a while, and I'm not saying this is a one-to-one. It's pretty darn close. This is a comparison to the most famous, I would argue, the most famous reaccumulation that we have, which is the reaccumulation that happened after the January run in 2021, going from roughly March all the way through May. And a lot of us, maybe we look at these things and we think about this as just a giant SOS because of where it camped out, in near the previous range. But if you pay attention, you can kind of see like the similarities here in the push-up. This is a preliminary supply. It's a redistribution after a sell-off, right? And in this case, the sell-off comes down pretty low. It comes back into the previous range. We get the same exact thing here. We came low. We did come back down below the previous top, and it's it's not exactly, one-to-one, and I wouldn't say anyone would claim that it's one-to-one, but the idea of the supply dropping us low and then coming back up and with this big auto reaction and then having this very, very like pointed cat ear range, right? That looks like it's going to just kind of keep sliding down. And I mean, when you look at the big picture, it's important to note like this has happened elsewhere and it's not been bullish. So when you look at the big picture and you check out something like this, you're like, well, wait a minute, in terms of like shape and structure, it's pretty darn similar, right? You get a really similar, really similar shape. And this is kind of like, at this point, become like a cliche for us, right? These kitty cat ear structures. But that structure is everywhere. So it's not enough just to say like, well, it looks close. You have to look at the volume. You have to look at the tests that are being made, specifically the test high and the test low. Another place that this appears and it's pretty diabolical is like right here. And you can see this one actually has a lot of similarity in with regard to this, except that it starts by going down. When we take a look at the overall structure here, it's almost, not exactly, but it's almost like one-to-one, right? And this ended in a distribution, okay? And this is really similar, as you can see, to this particular structure. So why this instead of this? Well, I can't be 100% certain about things like this. We're going to have to watch certain levels, but on the whole, considering where we are, the volume that's come in, we're on like a bottom, right? And to me, this could be like some crazy like distribution, like we saw back in December of 2021. But it really depends on the next action. And I think that it's not out of the question to still think that this is it's just not, right? We didn't come all the way down and retest that major creek, in my opinion. We came down and we just tested the top, but we did like a good 50% retrace. And we're at a pretty healthy spot that if this were to continue, it should see a decent push, at least up to where that gap fill is. That inverted head and shoulder target gets us there, right here. So on the whole, like with volume and everything else going on, it still looks to me like this is a very strong candidate for upside. But it is important to note, and I know this is an older chart when I was doing like falling structures. It's important to note that there is a lot of similarity, right? And when you look really close at a region like this, right, you're going to start seeing like, well, wait a second. They look almost identical, And this is part of fractal analysis that can get a little bit muddy because you have to be really careful, You have to be really careful when it comes to this kind of stuff because it does something really similar. Both of them have push higher. They actually look nearly identical. I mean, they really do. And they both have the push higher. They both have that double down thrust with the one in the middle being a little higher and then the lower one. The big thing is like what happens like when it gets to the end. If you don't have the ability to read the volume perfectly and you're having trouble with that, then the question becomes like, well, what happens when it gets to the end, right? And this breaks down. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It breaks down and it doesn't recover. There is a test and there is a possibility for a spring here, but it doesn't happen, And when you look at the big picture, again, it's like, well, where is the volume, right? And it becomes a difficult task. I think you have to just kind of go through step by step. And I did it yesterday and the day before, and we talked about volume profiles on this setup and, what we might expect and so on and so forth. And I think at the end of the day, the fact that we dropped into this range and then had the auto reaction to the upside is a very significant factor in this. Like we went higher and then we came back down and we were coming from a drive from the bottom. Does that make sense? As opposed to the other example, this one, where you're coming down and this is the reaction, right? And it doesn't even like, it has this double top, but you can see there's like a structural difference between this, which is this push all the way up, and then a sell-off that seems to be a reaccumulation, versus this, which is more of a topping action and a distribution. Okay? And yes, when we look at the big picture, you could see something like this and say, well, wait, there's that head and shoulder, it could be the same thing. And if it breaks down, then, we're in trouble and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, we are. I mean, there's no, when we see trouble, I just mean like, there's no like silver lining to that. If it's distribution and it comes down, it's coming down. You can't change that. The best thing for you to do right now, in my opinion, and it's not financial advice, but it's just common sense, is just be prepared, because it's possible, that this doesn't work out the way that we think it's going to work out. I could go through and tell you like a dozen different reasons why this is completely different. I could tell you half a dozen reasons or more why this is probably the same. The point is that the fractal itself doesn't give you the answers. It just gives you an example. And ultimately what you want to look for is the liquidity needs. So one of the things I have marked that Stockfather said, this wasn't quite right. You're saying that this should be like where the spring is, that there should be like a secondary spring here, because this would be the auto reaction support, and then there'd be a support in B, and then you'd have a spring. And so he was saying like it's still very possible that this comes way down beneath 9, if not very likely. So the difference in these two regions is that this doesn't do that. It has this kind of LPS at the end. There is in my opinion, like a way to read this that's a little bit simpler if you don't understand like the way the bottoms work, which is just, hey, there's a down channel. The down channel breaks. Watch until it comes up to this upper creek. I think this upper creek is situating itself like we would expect around 934. It's this kind of middle blue creek here. That's the one that was grabbed on that push up. You can see it pushes up high, goes over top of it, and then crashes down through it, right? And then it reacts here along this trend, and we've got this trend. There's the reaction. And then we get this bigger drop, right, until we get this M-shaped cross. I think we're kind of in that mode right now where we should be getting, if this is a good example, right, and this is bottoming out already, we should be starting to get that M-shaped cross. And I think that at that point, you're going to watch and see where it hops that creek. And it could take a minute, if it does that. So if we end up coming down lower, my expectation was be, down to 9 and then back up, maybe 917 or something, and then down low and come lower than the previous low. And if that happens and we do make that spring action, no LPS, I think the low at this point is like 8. I want to make sure. I always get this like off. It was like 891. Yeah, 891, I believe. So that's kind of the low spot that you'd be looking at. If it finds support above there, my expectation would be 897. Okay, at least. Like it could be higher than that, but that would be like the lowest. So really, like, there's not a lot yet to be said here until we get what? Well, get back over 934 with strength. And I think if we get back over 934 with strength, you're either, hey, crap, we can still be in a distribution, Booksy. So could this be a UTAD? Sure. But I think if you get back over 934 with strength, you're going to watch this outer creek cross. You see this blue line coming down? That would be like the last major creek resistance. That does come from the preliminary supply all the way down through this top. So it's kind of like the big fan, if you were to fan out each of these creeks. And I think that's the outermost creek that we have to deal with right now. So 934 would be a good place. I wouldn't even be trying to fish for a bottom in this situation. That's just not my opinion. If I did, it would be like small, like averaging in or something. And then I would really commit to a long position after it crosses 934 and then jumps this guy. And ideally, I know this kind of just rocketed straight up, but ideally you kind of want to see that back test and then go. At that point, you are looking at like an SOS area, and it would be right above where this auto reaction is. You have to do something similar to that when you get up top to 1050, otherwise it won't work out. But this is kind of like the game plan in terms of crosses and all that stuff. The way that I have it situated right now, it makes it look like it would happen today and into Monday. I don't know that for a fact that's going to happen. Timing is always difficult. I still think October 31st is a likely candidate. I said that I thought Tuesday and Wednesday this week was a likely candidate. You can see why. Tuesday we got that push up into the SOS type area, and then it broke down on Wednesday. So I was wrong about Wednesday's price action. On the whole, we went way lower than 934. We should have just bounced and come back up if it were going to just do that. But it is what it is. We adapt and we move on. So 3 minutes till open. What are my expectations? Again, I still think there's a likelihood we see some downside here before we jump over this particular trend. If we don't, then yeah, you can kind of immediately move into this gradual like push up to the 934 creek. But in the event that doesn't happen at rapid speed, right? I don't think it's out of the question that this thing ends up at like 950 or something Friday. I'm optimistic, though, that we could get all the way back up to 10 by the end of the week. So that being said, I'm not going to kind of beat the bush or beat around the bush anymore here. I would like to go ahead and close it up. You really have to see this come back above 934 and then make support over 980 as it does this SOS. Pretty simple. At that point, yeah, this is a pretty good buy-in. I mean, a lot of people are going to want to try to catch bottoms. It's possible that you can catch a bottom down here. I mean, I caught a bottom over here and rode it up and then ended up having to sell at a loss when it broke down here. But, you know, I'm not trying to catch every bottom. I think it's kind of dangerous. And the fact that this could come down pretty low, and especially if this ends up being more distributive and sellers really take over for some reason, you know, in the case of like a UTAD, you need to be prepared for that kind of a crazy price action. I think it's a dangerous place to be trying to catch bottoms right now. So that's just my opinion about it. You do what you want to do, but the confirmation's up here, you know, and you wouldn't be missing out. I mean, a lot of people are kind of worried, like, well, I'd be missing out and they'd be more expensive. Yeah, I mean, it's a 12% move. It's a big move, and you can kind of play that individually maybe. But, you know, if this works out, you should have an opportunity to get that at least 20% move. And then, yeah, I do think at this point, if this happens, we're likely going to see this just go straight up to that 13 marker, maybe as early as Tuesday or Wednesday next week. So it's still a really good move, you know, as long as this pans out here. But you don't want to be, I don't know, I'm not, you guys aren't kids. You understand what you're doing. Just be careful. That's all I got to say. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll talk to you later.